It's a pleasure to be here with you in this beautiful location. For the beginning of the next 20 minutes together, I would invite you all to please close your eyes and listen to the sound. You can open your eyes again. The sound that you're listening to is the sound of biodiversity. It's the sound that you would be hearing if you would be on a regenerative farm. And I'm curious, how many of the people in this room have been on a farm in the last year? Just raise your hands. Okay, that's more than usual. And how many of you have heard this sound when you were on that farm? See less hands going up, but still a few. So generally I would say, if you would have heard that sound, you would have been on a regenerative farm. Because on most industrial farms, the sound that you're hearing is this. It's the sound of silence. And that is exactly the reason why me and my co-founder Ivo started Climate Farmers 4 years ago. Over the next 20 minutes, I will take you on my personal journey. And after that, I will show you or share with you the learnings that we have made with Climate Farmers in supporting farmers across Europe in transitioning towards regenerative agriculture and putting bird sounds back on our farms. I personally grew up in Western Germany, in a tiny village with 500 people. Nothing special. My godmother had a 120-hectare farm, and as so many young people do in my generation, I left afterwards. I saw the frustrations that she was facing, and I decided, farming, countryside, that's not for me. So I went to the city. I moved to Amsterdam, I studied there, I worked in Amsterdam and Berlin for 10 years, ran a nightclub for 3 years, which is a different story, and also worked in several different impact startups. I loved living in the cities, I loved the people that I was meeting, but I was also missing nature. And I was missing the countryside. And so I was thinking, how can I bring the people from the city to the countryside? And now I had a relatively long journey coming here because I'm by now living in Portugal, which is pretty much on the other end of Europe. And the reason why I went to Portugal is because the country has had a lot of people leaving the countryside, even more than in other places in Europe, which is why the government passed a law that you can build up broken down houses and you don't need any planning permissions. As a German, that's pretty crazy. So what we did is we grouped together with 8 international friends and we bought an abandoned village in Portugal. Nothing too crazy, 12 houses and a few hectares of land. But it was enough to have me looking back at agriculture. And then I first looked into permaculture and then I found regenerative agriculture. And this was back in 2017 when nobody was speaking about this topic yet. But what I found was academic papers from Wageningen University from the 80s and 90s already speaking about the potential of carbon sequestration and biodiversity increase through farming. Now for me, this was crazy because I don't know how much you're aware of this, but agriculture is right now one of the main causes for climate change. 24% of all greenhouse gas emissions are coming from agriculture. And here are papers which are saying we can actually take carbon out of the atmosphere through our agriculture. So I was like, this seems weird. So I went on a research journey, being a good academic, and I spent 1 year visiting all of the regenerative farmers that I could find in Western Europe. I have to admit, I stayed in the area where I was. So I visited 9 countries, and I spent 1 year with 60 different farmers. This was all the regenerative farmers that I could find with pretty extensive research. Just to put things in perspective, we have 10.5 million farmers in the European Union. So I spent 1 year talking with these farmers, working with these farmers, and trying to understand, how did you get into regenerative agriculture? Why do you think it's not scaling? And what could I do to help you? And this is essentially what led to us starting Climate Farmers. Because the interesting thing was, no matter if these farmers were 2 hectares big or 2,000 hectares big, no matter if they were in Italy or in Spain or in Germany or in the Netherlands, the answers were almost always the same. One of the biggest issues that we're having, it's not sexy to be a farmer. I don't know how the situation in Romania is. I would be surprised. I hope it's different, but I would be surprised. But in Western Europe, nobody wants to be a farmer. It's not something that people aspire to. It's not something that you mention on your first Tinder date. And it's not something that young people want to do. So many farms are dying out in our current generation. People like to become life coaches. People like to become consultants, DJs, conference organizers maybe even. But farming is not the thing that they aspire to. And this is a massive problem. Because we could all do with less life coaches. But we can't do with less farmers. Farmers are feeding us on a daily basis. And if we don't have a next generation of farmers, then we will run into a food crisis in the European Union. And the situation that we're facing in Europe right now is that the average age of farmers is 58 years old. Now, I can understand. You're 58 years old, you're 5 years before retirement, you're not going to have the energy to suddenly make a massive transition on your farm. So first issue that we heard from the farmers is we need to make farming sexy again. And that's why we took the name Climate Farmers and why we initially focused very much on storytelling and why we told the story and shared the profiles of these initial farmers that I visited in order to explain why we believe that farmers, and especially regenerative farmers, are damn sexy and are the heroes of our times. At this point, we were also working on a documentary. The Nana documentary came out, which is called Kiss the Ground. If you haven't watched it yet, highly recommend it. It's out on Netflix. They got Woody Harrelson as a narrator. They had a much bigger budget than we ever could have had. And this really helped us with pushing farming into the mainstream. Or not mainstream, but with pushing it forward, let's say. So the second issue that the farmers were telling us was that they, first of all, they did not know each other. So this was 60 farmers in 9 countries, just to keep in mind. And they all thought they were the only ones in Europe. They were not connected with each other. And they had issues with figuring out what works in what context. So for that reason, we started building up a community. And we brought these farmers together, we connected them with each other, and we also started having online and offline learning sessions together with these farmers in order to help them exchange best practices with each other. And then the third issue that we heard from the farmers is the issue of transition financing. If you want to transition from conventional agriculture towards regenerative agriculture, there are costs involved with that. And the question is, who is carrying those costs? Right now, farmers are carrying the entire risks themselves, and they're carrying the entire costs themselves. So even though these regenerative farmers are providing ecosystem services for all of us, which we have already verified by research since 30 years, ranging from carbon sequestration over biodiversity increase to soil water storage increase, which would have prevented the floodings that we had in many European countries in the last 3 years. There's no government paying for it, there's no private sector paying for it, and farmers are carrying it by themselves. And that is exactly the reason why after this tour, I started Climate Farmers. So just to back up on this again, agriculture is a central player to the crossing of the planetary boundaries. Now, we're here at the Climate Change Summit, so I hope you all know about the planetary boundaries. I think it's probably the most important concept in recent climate change history. It comes from the Club of Rome, and specifically from Johann Rockström, and it basically outlines how humanity would have to live in order to live in line with this planet. Now, we have crossed most of these planetary boundaries already, and agriculture is one of the main reasons for that. It's massively responsible for biodiversity loss due to the incredibly well work of the chemical fertilizer companies in pushing their products on the policy level and onto farmers, and due to the fact also that, as we keep in mind, 24% of all greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture because of carbon that has been stored in the soil and has been released due to our farming practices. So the good news is, we do have an answer to this. Regenerative agriculture addresses most of the issues which we're currently facing in farming. It reduces the CO2 emissions, it increases the water storage capacity of the soil, it increases the biodiversity, and it also helps farmers economically. Due to the recent developments in Europe, and especially the Russia-Ukraine war, fertilizer prices have increased by 800% over the last 4 years. For those of you that work with a computer like me, that will mean a MacBook suddenly costs 25,000 euros. This means that profit margins of farmers are going down even less, and they were already not very big before. And at the same time, we also have the issue that we don't really know how to support farmers in this because they need the fertilizers in order to be able to do the industrial farming. So, we have the answers. We know that we can capture carbon with this, but for some reason, it's still not scaling. It's still not happening. When we started, there was maybe 100 farmers. By now, we expect that we have something around 10,000 farmers in the European Union, which are somewhere on their regenerative journey. Again, this is 10,000 out of 10 million. This is a fraction of what we actually need to make the dent into the food crisis and the climate crisis, which we're all experiencing. So what do we need to make happen in order to scale regenerative agriculture? We've analyzed this over the last 4 years, And when we speak of scaled regenerative agriculture, what we want to get to is that 10% of all European farmland is under regenerative management. 10%, because we believe at that point, every farmer in the European Union has a farm that he or she can relate with and can visit. Because you probably can imagine farmers are not very impressed by PowerPoint presentations. Farmers are impressed when you bring them on a farm and you show them that it's working in practice. And we have seen some incredible results with this, with showing in southern Portugal, for example, farmers who are doing regenerative agriculture, and you have green grass in June, something that's unheard of in southern Portugal. And that's why the farmers are like, where's the irrigation system? How are you doing this? And it's amazing to see this happen. Right now, we don't have enough model farms to make that happen. We don't have enough farms where we can bring farmers and show them how it's working in practice. So we need to go to these 10%. How do we get there? We get there if we can show that regenerative agriculture makes economical sense for farmers. Farmers are business people. They run a farm as a business. They need to run that farm profitable. And the main issue that they're having right now, that the way how they're pushed in our system is destroying our environment. They're pushed through our subsidy system, they're pushed by the use of fertilizers, and they're pushed by only getting paid for yields. So if you only get paid for yields, what is the thing you're going to focus on? Yields. What you should be focusing on is soil health. So knowledge and finance. Let's break this down. On the knowledge side of things, the very first thing we need to start with is the mindset. And that is exactly the reason why we see young farmers driving this forward, because they have not had the same amount of indoctrination that unfortunately most of the farmers who are now in their 50s have had. For years, they've always been told that they need to plow, they need to use glyphosate, they need to use chemical products, and they need to have monoculture farms. All of this is destructive to the environment. All of this is releasing carbon into the atmosphere. But all of this was what we have been teaching our farmers to do. So what we are trying to do is to change their mindset from focusing just on yield to understanding that their farm is a living and thriving, ideally, ecosystem where they have to focus on what the ecosystem needs. They should focus on building up soil health. You build up soil health if you operate like nature does. And nature is a perfect farmer, a perfect designer, and a perfect architect. And what would you never see in nature? Monoculture. Nature works in diversity because plants have a symbiosis with each other, which functions above soil and below soil. At the very basic, what you can imagine is that the plant, through photosynthesis, takes carbon out of the atmosphere, it brings it in the roots, and then in the roots you have something like a Turkish bazaar going on, where the plants are trading the carbon through basically mycorrhiza are like the Dutchman of the soil, which is mushrooms, which are then bringing the carbon to other roots of other plants and trading this against nitrogen, against potassium, against water, against sugar. And this is a very, very alive bazaar. There's a lot of stuff going on. And what we are doing is we're basically going down there by plowing, we're kicking out everybody out of the bazaar, and we're starting all over again every year. We're putting poison on it, we're killing the bazaar down there, and we're not really furthering the trade. What we need to start having is farmers that have the mindset, how do I support that bazaar? How do I support the trading that is going on below the soil? And then we have the finance side of things. We already heard it from Anton before as well. We need to measure how regeneration is taking place, for which we need MRV, which I'm going to get to later, monitoring, reporting, and verification, for those of you that just joined the Green Room. And we need to start paying as society for the ecosystem services that farmers are providing. My hometown, Geilenkirchen, got flooded when the floods were in Germany and the Netherlands in 2019. The floods had a damage of 31 billion euros. Those damages would not have happened if we would have healthy soils. Healthy soil absorbs water when it falls from the sky, it stores it, and then it releases it again in times of drought. What we have happening, and if we have unhealthy soil, it rains and the soil is not able to absorb that water because there's no life in the soil, and you have erosion happening, you have flooding happening, and you have the damages happening. So we had 31 billion in damages just in those floods, with many more floods over the last few years. And the only government that we have found and managed to convince with lobbying so far to put money into regenerative agriculture is the Dutch government, with 129 million. Now put those two numbers in perspective. We're nowhere near to what we need to make this a reality. So we've been trying our best to do our part in making this happen. We've been very closely working together with our pharma community in 16 different countries, and we did a lot of testing in 2021 in order to see what are the services that bring most value to farmers, and what are the best way how we can serve farmers in their transition towards regenerative agriculture. And the conclusions that we came to was, first, we need to start with a farm enterprise analysis. So we're looking at the farm, we're doing something that we call a holistic context, and we're helping the farmers to understand what are the things that are going right on the farm right now, what are the things that are not going so well on the farm right now, and what could we do in order to transition this farm towards regenerative agriculture, thereby increasing the climate resilience and also increasing the profit as well as the ecosystem services. And then we have the community. And this is one of my favorite parts of my life right now. Coming from the startup world, we of course tried to get farmers on Slack. We tried to get them on Mighty Gathering. We miserably failed. Farmers have WhatsApp, and they love WhatsApp. So what we do right now is we have WhatsApp communities, which are managed by farmers in all the different countries, where they're exchanging with each other anything. This can be trouble that you have with your partner, or your children, or your dog for that matter, but it can also be just very practical things on the farm which are going wrong. And in all of these groups, we see a massive amount of interactions, and farmers are just supporting each other. From this, we now have a mentor-mentee program, where farmers who are more experienced in regenerative agriculture are supporting farmers who are just getting on that path for free. We had the idea of paying them 50 euros per hour. So far, every single farmer said, I don't need the money. I'm happy to do this. So we have an incredible community around it. And the nice thing is that regenerative farmers do love to support each other on their journey, which makes it a lot easier for us and which makes us a big pleasure to work with them. And then we have European experts. The issue that we're having is that over the last 3 years, things kiss the ground basically, Regen Ag has seen a bit of a hype. Suddenly, everybody's talking about it, but nobody knows what they're talking about. And as it always goes when you have a hype, you have people who jump on the hype train. So suddenly we saw all these websites popping up with Regen Ag consultants. My personal experience, the more fancy the website, the less knowledge the person has. Most of the people who really are good regenerative agriculture consultants, they don't need a fancy website. Their phone is buzzing all the time, and they're busy being on the farm. And this is also the feedback that we got from the farmers, that we have many cases of conventional farmers that want to go region, find a fake consultant, and then decide it's not the right thing. So we built a platform with by now 115 consultants, which are all backed up by our farmers. So we asked our farmers who they can recommend, and we keep the recommendations. So that farmers that work through us with consultants know that the person actually knows what they're talking about. And through this, we came to something which we call the blueprint transition process. So first, we check the mindset. Then, we check the business context of the farm. Then, we check what is the ecological context, what is the soil type, what are the weather conditions, what is the climate change predictions which are happening in your region. Then we go into implementation. We match them in the peer group, we match them with an expert, and afterwards, we're collecting data on what is going on the farm. So the way how we are approaching is we are collaborating with Wageningen University and with a few other academic institutions in Europe, and we are working with a mixture, let's say, of satellite technology with Sentinel-2, which is a freely available satellite from the European Union. We're taking soil samples, and we're also doing modeling. And we're doing this on an annual basis, so we establish a baseline at the beginning of the transition of the farm, and then every year we generate a report, which we give back to the farmer, so that the farmer can see what is going on in the farm and what is going in the right or in the wrong direction. At the same time, we're also starting to pay farmers for the ecosystem services that they're providing for all of us. Now, this is one thing that I don't really like, but the reality is, unfortunately, the only thing that I can really pay farmers for right now is carbon. And I don't like the carbon hype. I don't agree with the carbon hype. But we have a carbon hype. So people, and especially companies by now, at least they came to the conclusion that, maybe I should measure the damage that I'm doing to this planet, at least on the carbon point of view, and maybe I should compensate for that one as well. Right now, they're mostly doing this by supporting some project in the global south where they have no idea what's actually going on there. What we are doing is, we're matching these companies with farmers on a local level. So we connect the two of them. We enable the company to visit the farmer, to see directly what they're doing with the money that they're giving to the farmer, and we sell carbon credits to them for 50 euros a ton, which is quite a premium price on the voluntary carbon market for those of you which are operating on there. I would love to sell regeneration credits and not just carbon credits. I would love to pay farmers for building up biodiversity, which we can measure very easily with a technology which is called eDNA. I would also love to pay farmers for storing water in the soil, which would make a lot of sense. Remember the flooding damages. Unfortunately, it's not the society that we're living in. I continuously, and companies like to start talking about biodiversity, don't believe them. They don't like paying for it. I have a lot of customers of ours which are buying carbon credits for 100,000, 150,000 euros, and for 5,000 euros, I can give them a very accurate measurement of the increase in biodiversity. I haven't found a single company so far that was willing to pay 5,000 euros extra for that data. That is the unfortunate reality that we're living in right now. Nevertheless, we are able to measure these things. We are also able to, we're on 3 research projects right now where we measure the nutrient density, which is another exciting topic on this. The food that we're eating right now, due to the poison that we're growing it with, has very little nutrients. That's also the reason why we see diseases like cancer rising so much. Conveniently, companies like Bayer sell us the poison for the field and the medicine afterwards. Very nice coincidence. So the situation that we're having is that an orange nowadays has 1/6 of the nutrients that it used to have 50 years ago. And that's why we're involved in several studies where we're showing that food that's grown from healthy soil leads to healthy produce, which leads to healthy people. Who would have thought? And this is another thing which I think will really be helping and pushing regenerative agriculture into the mainstream when we start showing that if you pay more for regenerative produce, you can actually nourish your body and not just feed it with calories without any nourishment. So much on us. Now let's talk about the stars of the show. I want to close this off with just introducing you to 3 of the farmers that we're working with. One of them is, for example, Francisco Alves. He was the one that turned me from a 7-year vegetarian to a farmtarian. Because I became a vegetarian because I believe that there's no way in eating meat that is in line with the climate. Probably a very controversial statement I'm making here right now. So I'm very curious about feedback afterwards. But the interesting thing is, if you actually manage animals in line with nature, again, nature doesn't create animals which harm itself. So also cows, which we're all blaming right now to be the climate killer, yes, they are. Because we freaking put them in stables and feed them with corn and wheat, which they're not supposed to eat. Cows are ruminants, which means they have a stomach which is made to eat grass, similar to buffaloes, for example. And now, maybe some of you have even seen it in the wild. Hopefully, at least in a documentary you have seen it. Buffaloes in the wild, they're very tightly together because of predators. They're grazing one day, and then they move on. And they don't return to the same patch for several months. And what happens then is that the grass kicks into a perfect symbiosis with the cows, and it grows back stronger, and it also grows the roots stronger. And what does it do? It stores carbon. Massive amounts of it. It stores more carbon than trees do if you look at the same hectare size. So what are we doing with farmers like Francisco? We're helping them to set up a holistic grazing plan with his animals so that he's rotating them on a daily basis. And in his case, he has first the sheep and the goats going through, eating all the bushes and the brambles. Then the cows go eat the grass. And then the chickens and the pigs go afterwards and spread all the poo around. And you have a beautiful regeneration of the land happening. You have animals which are living a thriving life in nature, probably better than most wild boars do in the wild. And you're storing carbon in the soil, and you're building biodiversity. With the money that we're paying Francisco for the carbon credits that he's generating, he's building an agroforestry system to integrate trees. Makes a lot of sense. You get shade for your animals, you get carbon stored in the soil, and you get trees, which are just generally nice to look at. And he's also working on a key line design, which is a regenerative farming practice. Another one, which I really like, is women are leading the way in regenerative agriculture. Generally, in agriculture, women are a very underrepresented group. Most of the time, they're actually managing the finances of the farm in the background, but they're not on the front. What we see now happening is that in Regen Ag, a lot of young women especially are taking over the farm of their parents, and they're saying, okay, I take it over, but only if you let me do it my way, and if you let me transition it towards regenerative agriculture. Beatriz is one of them. She's in Spain, and she's the 4th generation farmer, the first female farmer in her family. With her, it's a similar situation. We created a holistic grazing plan. She's also doing no-till, direct seeding, so she's growing crops as well, but she's not plowing. She's just making a small cut to enter the seeds, and she's granting cover crops, so she continuously has the soil covered. And then closing it off with Juan Manuel, another large-scale farmer, 340 hectares, who's growing arable crops, who's having massive issues due to the water situation in Spain right now, and with the carbon credits that we are paying him, he's currently building a lagoon in order to save water and in order to be able to store water for the dry seasons, which are becoming longer and longer in Spain. So altogether, essentially, I would recommend to everybody, start thinking about the food that you're eating. And don't just start thinking about what kind of food you're eating, but start thinking about how is the food grown that I'm eating? Because that makes a massive difference for yourself and for the planet. Thank you.